4 days, 9 safety experts, 13 presentations, one simple mission: to make diving safer. This is Dan at DEMA 2020. Safety seminars from the pros who know.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of Dan's DEMA 2020 Talks. We are thrilled to be coming to you in this unusual format. As much as we'd like to see you all face to face, I guess that'll have to wait until next year. But for now, we are coming to you live via the power of the interwebs. My name is Brian Harper. I'm the Communications Director at Dan. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Go ahead and post in the chat. Tell us where you are tuning in from. Each session will be followed by a Q&A. And so as questions occur to you as you watch the presentations, go ahead and drop those in the chat. You can post them for everyone to see if you don't mind asking publicly, or you can send them directly to me, Brian Harper, and I will ensure that I pitch them to the presenter at the end of their talk. Please do avoid sending your questions to the Divers Alert Network Zoom account. That chat is not being monitored. But with all that being said, let's jump into this presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Petar Denoble. Petar is the Vice President of Research here at Dan. He has been with Dan for 28 years, where he has led the organization's diving injury and fatality monitoring program. Among his research is Project Dive Exploration, the world's largest study of dive exposures and outcomes using personal dive computers. And so to present this afternoon on freediving and breath hold fatalities, Petar Denoble.
Good afternoon. I will talk today about snorkeling and breath hold diving fatalities. And first, let's clarify some of these terms. What's the snorkeling and what's the breath hold diving? Well, when we talk about snorkeling, it's mainly activities from the surface when swimmers equipped with this mask and snorkel observe what's going on underwater. When we talk about breath hold diving, then it's mainly activities underwater, either at the bottom of the sea floor or in the depth. And from the operational points, this has been divided into skin diving, as many agencies call this activity, where divers dive up to 30 feet, and free diving, where that's mainly competitive diving of highly trained and fit athletes. Skin diving may include harvesting of seafood, spearfishing, shark tooth collection, shellfish collection, diving for photography, and so on. We do talk about these three things differently because of different problems that are there. And snorkeling that some of you may not consider breath hold diving, still sometimes involves diving under the surface, and it's very difficult to distinguish what happened to snorkelers, whether he got injured while diving underwater or just by being at the surface. So as the next step, we will try to consider what are the differences in the exposure, and with it, what different possible injuries that come with it. So in immersion, that's common to all breath hold divers and snorkelers, we have a risk of sudden cardiac death immersion pulmonary edema, and we have some equipment-related issues, mainly related to masks and snorkel. And then we have also sea and weather conditions that may cause some injuries, or various marine sea creatures that can injure swimmers and divers. When it comes to skin diving, then we have to take into consideration risks of prolonged apnea that can cause shallow water blackout, which is the main cause of fatalities in spear fishermen and other skin divers. And also samba, that's one of the hypoxic manifestation in static apnea. Then with extreme depth, we have possibilities of squeeze injuries of lung, sinuses, among others. This we can see not only in extreme diving, but also in spear fishermen. And then with repetitive deep diving, divers run risk of hypoxic brain injury and decompression sickness, which are not so easy to distinguish, and maybe their earliest, what they were described, was Taravana in Tuamotu divers in early 60s by Cross. Of course, to get very deep and stay very long, divers have to practice some maneuvers that may be dangerous, like lung packing and sinus flooding. That may cause injury also. So there is so many things that could happen to divers that it would be difficult to cover it all in one talk. So I make some choices here, and this is what are my criteria for the choice of topics. First, what is the relative significance of the problem? Second, is there awareness or lack of awareness of the problem? And then preventability of it. So I will talk about fatality rates first to address the relative significance of the problem. And I will try to outline differences between snorkeling and breath hold fatalities. And then I will address some of the most common causes of fatalities in snorkeling and breath hold diving. That is sudden cardiac death, immersion pulmonary edema, mask and snorkel issues, shallow water blackout, and decompression sickness in free diving, which is not definitely, which is rarely fatal and rare, but it always, there is always a lot of interest for that. And at the end, we'll provide few tips for improving safety in snorkeling and breath hold diving. So let's first talk about fatality rates. That tells us how big the problem is. We have to base that on a data, and data at hand are done database for 2009 through 2018, public health data from California for period of 2005 to 2014, and Australia data 1994, 2013 that have been published by John Lipman. Here are the data that we have collected and done. By the year, you can see that there was 50 to 70 fatalities per year in this period, but we cannot say that these are the all fatalities that occur. This is just what came to our attention and what we were able to identify with some modest effort. You know that our main focus is always on scuba fatalities, but since breath hold diving has become more popular, we also turn our attention recently to fatalities in breath hold diving. So keep in mind, this is not the total number of fatalities that occur, and this reflects, these are the cases collected from all around the world. Unlike the fatalities from scuba diving, where we stay focused on United States and Canada. But we don't know what is the denominator here. So we don't know how many people practice diving. And thus, we cannot tell how big this problem is. We don't know, we don't have a relative measure of that. However, using public health data, our colleague Petar previously have came to some numbers that are very useful. He looked into non-fatal emergency department records, non-fatal hospital records, and fatality from California, from public health sources in California. And these are the numbers by years. So there's a total of 2,500 cases. Now, this illustrates also nicely the injury pyramid. You can see that the incidents that require emergency department visits are the highest here, 1,524. Smaller number of that ends up in the hospital for some time, and very few are fatal. Taking into account the population from which these numbers are extracted, Peter came with estimate of the rate of fatalities per 1 million population. And for fatal breath hold injuries, it's rather low, 0.06 per 1 million population. If we consider that not all fatalities end up in emergency department and hospitals, and even if we allowed that this number is in 10 times greater than what is here captured, the fatality rate per 1 million would still be less than 1. So is that much? How much is that? I mean, it's very hard to tell for those who are affected, but that it's a catastrophic event. For the society, that's not that big event, especially when you compare it, for example, with drowning in swimming pools in USA, which is 3,500 cases annually per population of 350 million. That yields the rate of 10 swimming pool drowning per 1 million population. That's 10 times higher than just breath hold fatality. Much more reliable estimate of fatality rates in breath hold diving we get from data collected in Australia. And practically, these 140 cases for the period of year 94 to 2006 represent all the cases available from coroners. And many of these cases have had also autopsy findings. So on estimated 2 million snorkelers in that period, there were 10 deaths per year, which gives rate of 5 deaths per 1 million snorkelers. And out of these 5 deaths, 2 were cardiac-related deaths. Now I will show, well, we have also something of notice here that over the years, since 60s through today, the number of breath hold and snorkeling fatalities in Australia is increasing, and that reflects the trend in the world. Australia, particularly with the Great Coral Reef, is very attractive area for snorkeling, and there is big industry there offering these services. So that's why it's that increase there. But with that increase, we also see the increasing age of victims of snorkeling incidents, meaning that more and more older people are participating in these activities. Another similar activity that is worth of looking into is US triathlon. That involves, as you know, the running, biking, and swimming in the water. And in the period of 1985 to 2016, there was about 4,776,000 participants and 135 sudden deaths. So this sudden deaths includes not only deaths, but also those with cardiac arrest that were resuscitated or attempted to resuscitate. Now we are looking into incidents here because we have hard numbers. So overall incidence of death of cardiac arrest per 100,000 is 1.74, and that yields per 1 million 17 cases per 1 million. We can also see that relative how the rates differ between men and women. More men have higher fatality rates than women triathlon athletes. And then men over 60 years and older, their rate is far more exceeds the rate of the average participants in a triathlon. Also, what's important to notice here that 40% of these victims were first-time participants, and 44 had clinically relevant cardiovascular abnormalities. So as we will later talk about prevention, I would like to point here that this group of 40% who were first-time participants probably would benefit from pre-participation screening. We don't know whether they were screened or not, but there is no requirements for triathlon participants to be screened. So maybe it's something, by now, maybe it has been required, but at this time, when this data reflects, it was not requirement. And similarly with snorkel participants, there is no requirement for any screening, but on the other hand, we cannot propose that because that would be prohibitive for participation of most people, and that it's not warranted based on low fatality rates. Now let's put together these fatality rates that we have discussed so we have a better picture of it. You have here breath hold death, overall fatality rates are 2 per 1 million, breath hold cardiac death, 5 per 1 million, and then triathlon fatality rates 17.4 overall, and triathlon fatality rates in men over 60, 186. You also remember that from Australia data that fatalities of snorkeling and breath hold incidents are getting older and older, so relatively low rate in breath hold fatality deaths from the study in comparison to this triathlon indicates that problem is relatively small. But it's not small from Australian government who is afraid that having a relatively large number of breath hold fatalities can hurt the industry, which is a big contributor to the overall economy of Australia. So they are initiating some studies to look into possible causes of snorkeling deaths. I would like now to look into how snorkeling fatalities may differ from breath hold fatalities. We will look in demographics, type of activities, and causes of death. Again, here I will present you sex and age of victims from California data. And you can see that among people that occur in a hospital, there is about 30% or more of female divers. But among the fatalities, there is only 18% of female divers. And age distribution by age groups is shown here and definitely is skewed toward the younger age. So injured divers are of younger age, but when we look into the age of victims from DAM data, we can see that there is a lot of victims of older age there. So regarding that their participation is lower, this may mean that they have higher rates of fatality. If we look on distribution of age and sex of victims from DAN data for 2010-2018, there is only 15% of fatality are women, and they are of older age here, relatively than the male victim, who probably participate more in spearfishing and other type of skin diving, snorkeling. And this is still a reminder, people who get injured but not fatally injured, women represent higher percentage than in the group of fatal incidents. Now, if we compare age of snorkeling fatalities versus breath hold fatalities, then we can see that snorkeling fatalities are definitely older, this is blue thing, than the breath hold fatalities, which tend to be younger, and that's this divide there. You can see that mean age for snorkeling victims is about 51 years, and for breath hold 37, and that the male represent 76% of snorkeling victims and 97% of breath hold victims. So we see that higher participation of older people and female among snorkeling is kind of reflection of perception that snorkeling is a relatively innocuous activity, and thus there is no restriction who can participate there. People don't hesitate to participate. If we look where the things happen, then we can see again for 20 years data that in that period, the 3 states in USA with most breath hold and scuba fatality, breath hold and snorkeling fatalities are Hawaii, Florida, and California. That varies a little bit over the year, but they always stay at the top. And that's definitely because of the diving conditions and interesting things they can see in the water of Florida, California, and Hawaii. Because most of it occur in ocean, but some do occur in fresh water, some in pool, other, and also in caves. That, you know, there are few cases in caves, and when reviewing the fatalities, you know, I remember these cases because I wouldn't expect people to do free diving in caves, but unfortunately they do, and that's very dangerous activity. When it comes to pools, then it's a small fraction of fatalities, breath hold fatalities that occur there, but there is a lot of attention to that. So in 2015, US swimming pools have banned long breath holding in their pools, and that was based on several cases that occur but have a high visibility. Looking through the data for 13 years, for 33 years practically, in New York State, there was only 4 people who died in the pool because of practicing breath hold there. That doesn't mean that there was no other who died, but this pertains to highly trained people who used swimming pools for trainings. Unfortunately, they were banned based on this relatively small number of fatalities. Similarly, in Australia, there were in 13 years, there were 12 people who died from snorkeling and breath hold diving, and there were autopsy findings available for them. Among these 12, 4 had pre-existing medical conditions, predominantly cardiac, and 3 had blood alcohol levels exceeding 0.05 gram, meaning that were intoxicated to some level that contributed to their death there. So altogether, but breath hold fatalities are not so big problem, but they have a high visibility and they draw attention of the public, which results sometimes in some decisions that can hurt the activities as such. Looking at then data for this 10-year period, most of that occurred while snorkeling. Free diving is practically the smallest number generated, the smallest number of fatalities, and practically never or very rarely during the formal competition and training. Free divers who practice alone are more often victims than divers who practice in an organized environment. Collecting and spearfishing is also source of large number of breath hold fatalities, and no wonder that people, the way how people do spearfishing and collecting, that pushes them over the limit, and they end up either most of the time as blackout victims, or sometimes they get entangled or hurt, injured from other causes. But snorkeling is the largest source of breath hold and snorkeling fatalities. So now we would like to look at what are the most common causes of fatalities. You may know that we published papers on analysis of scuba fatalities, where we are looking in disabling injuries, disabling agents or mechanisms, and on triggers. Because just the cause of death in water environment doesn't tell us much. Water erases the traces, and everything looks like drowning. So it takes some effort to identify disabling injuries, agents, and triggers. And most of the time, we are not able to do it in the data collected in USA, but in Australia data, which all end up in the coroner's reports, there is much more data available, and John Lipman was able to conduct very nice analysis where he was looking into causes, and he showed that in most cases, disabling agent is asphyxia or drowning, and that ends up to be the cause of death most of the time. But also cardiac causes have a very large contributor to the causes of fatalities. Practically, asphyxia and cardiac causes are leading causes of death in breath hold and snorkeling diving. Of course, there is trauma there. Imagine struck by boat. You can see in the newspaper, not that often, but when you see that, it sticks with you because it's something that's memorable. Also, one more impressionable cause is shark attack or crocodile attack. And we see that most of the time is involving fishermen or scallops harvester, but sometimes also surface swimmer or snorkelers. We cannot cover all causes, but we will try to talk more about these most common causes. From the same study from Australia, it comes this analysis of triggers. And you could classify triggers in various ways, but this is quite revealing, and that's why I'm showing it to you. Here, 56% was environment related, related to conditions, to sea waves, to currents, then to immersion effects, and also to marine animal and boat contact. 27 or 17% unknown, and in 13 cases, it was due to extended apnea, and that occurred in spearfishing or practicing in pool or ocean, and the outcome was the blackout, shallow water blackout. What is surprising here that in 10% of cases, water aspiration was suspected as a primary disabling injury. And that's especially important for snorkeler divers who are not skilled, who do not have much training or any training at all, and flooding snorkel or getting snorkel underwater can cause sudden aspiration of water, choking, and it may distress swimmer in such measure that he just drowned. We have also about 8% related to exertion. It's not just condition related, it's the other part, but swimming or doing some heavy work there, like carrying equipment and catches, and also surface swim. Anxiety, some primary errors like entanglement, and some equipment-related issues. I would come later back again to this environment-related that hides these cardiac issues, and also to this blackout and water aspiration. So, all this here, sudden cardiac death, immersion pulmonary edema, equipment-related issues like snorkel and masks, and sea and weather conditions that affect all type of snorkel and breathhold diving doesn't necessarily require underwater diving to be affected by that. There are several causes of sudden cardiac death or sudden death due to cardiac issues. The most common is sudden cardiac arrest. That means that heart suddenly stops beating because of loss of rhythm, or because of such erratic rhythm that pumping action of heart is lost. And it cannot be survived for a long time. People just drown in such cases. If they are in the water, if they are in the public, they may be rescued by bystanders who can start to provide artificial respiration and external heart massage. Another thing, acute coronary syndrome means ischemic heart attack, where the heart arteries are blocked or in spasm and they don't supply enough blood to heart muscles. This is difficult also to prove, but sometimes you can see old heart attack, the signs of previous heart attack, as well as some complication of recent heart attack. Condition that people are talking, scientists are talking in recent years is stress cardiomyopathy, including Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, which can occur suddenly in brief period, and it means practically that heart is losing its functionality because of stress and all hormones that affect heart in such situation. This can be related. This can precede immersion pulmonary edema, or it can be part of immersion pulmonary edema and other conditions. So, how big is the problem of sudden cardiac arrest? We can look at out-of-hospital cardiac arrest data, which are readily available. In United States, there is 347,000 deaths every year due to out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Means 1 of 7 people in US will die of sudden cardiac death. When this happens in the public and EMS is available, about 30% of these patients will survive to hospital. However, only 10% will survive to hospital discharge. For prevention of the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, it's important to notice that only 25% had no symptoms before the onset of arrest. So they didn't have any warning that would direct them to go to seek medical evaluation. The majority of this occur at home or at residence, 68.5%. But no particular activity is necessary to elicit sudden cardiac arrest. Which means that some of the cardiac arrest in scuba divers, in breath hold divers and snorkelers may be just circumstantial, that person happened to be in water with mask and snorkel on him at that time. But we never reject some effects of immersion on physiology of divers, and we admit that diving and swimming is an additional provocative factor that can contribute to onset of cardiac arrest. Well, we are also talking about automated external defibrillators and whether they should be available on every boat and every practically beach. But we have to remind us that only 1 in 5 cases may have shockable rhythm. It means if you are in complete arrest, there is no rhythm, automated external defibrillator cannot achieve any difference. If heart is in an erratic rhythm, then AED can revert that erratic rhythm in a normal rhythm. So this all tells that is relatively little that we can do, and about not this big problem for society, but about that relatively big problem for the snorkeling and diving industry, but relatively small public health problem. Well, when we are looking still, would we identify people who could be, for whom the diving and swimming would be a provocative factor that can cause death? And in 2018, among the few dozens of breath hold fatalities, there were maybe a dozen with autopsy reports. And out of the dozen, in 6 cases, there was report of cardiomegaly, means enlarged heart, with heart weights up to 450 up to 590 grams, which exceeds the average heart rate. And this doesn't mean that heart rate is stronger. Most often it means that the heart doesn't function properly, and also because of the enlarged mass of the heart, with the same wiring of the heart, which doesn't increase proportionally, the chances of dysrhythmia, and especially malignant dysrhythmias, are higher. So it's well known that left ventricular hypertrophy, that's a special form of cardiomegaly, is associated with a higher risk of sudden cardiac death, but also it may be associated with higher risk of immersion pulmonary edema. So when we mention immersion pulmonary edema, by now, I hope that most people who are involved with swimming and diving are aware of what it is. This is what they say, drowning from within, because the water, the liquid from the blood is passing through the capillaries into alveoli, into lungs, and flooding the alveoli, and disturbing exchange of gases, so that people with pulmonary edema feel dyspnea, difficulty breathing, and also they are coughing, and coughing often frothy sputum with of pinkish color, sometimes blood. For in the swimmers, this is often, temporary, and as soon as they get out of water, the symptoms start to subside, but in some cases can be fatal. What is important is that this may be recurrent, and repeated bouts of it may be fatal. So it's important to be aware that any symptoms that involve difficulty breathing, coughing, and pink and frothy sputum, regardless of its intensity, should prompt diver to seek professional medical evaluation, not just to talk to another diver. Yes, talk to your colleagues, but also seek full medical examination, because there may be some factors there that are predisposing you to immersion pulmonary edema, And these may be, of course, physical exertion that's in young athletes, but arterial hypertension, older age, female gender, heart and lung diseases, cold water, overhydration, and use of NSAIDs. As I said, not only older divers and swimmers and female genders, but that affects also young divers and a lot of young military recruits, and as well as triathlon swimmers who are athletes and healthy. So we know some predisposing factors, but it's important to remember that physical exertion, cold water, overhydration can induce immersion pulmonary edema without other present factors. So incidence and prevalence, well, people admitted for treatment in swimmers, triathlon, and military is about 0.5% of participants. But if you actively screen for symptoms in these athletes and military during the training, you can discover it mild symptoms to severe symptoms in 1 to 30% of participants. While on the other hand, if we look at prevalence of having experienced immersion pulmonary edema, that is done with various surveys, we see that it is around 1% or more. In divers, it's not known how often that occurs and what is the incidence, because most likely it's underreported. But in some paper, we know that this retrospective study showed that of 42 scuba and snorkelers' deaths, 4 were related to swimmers' immersion pulmonary edema. Another collection of cases of IPE was published by Edmonds from Oceania for the period of 2002 to 2018. They were looking only for cases with proven diagnosis by pathologist and physician, and they have found 31 cases of IPE, 9 of which ended fatal. So it doesn't look like a lot, but based on what we see in triathlon and military swimmer, we can be sure that it's underreported, and we have to be alert of that. Since we started more talking about that and publishing, and more papers was published, we see more and more reports of immersion pulmonary edema. This is one case that's typical. It was 59 years old woman. She was practically healthy, but she experienced these symptoms while coughing and blood-tinged sputum and shortness of breath while she was snorkeling. She didn't have any other associated symptoms like chest pain, palpitation, dizziness, syncope, headache, or vomiting. So it was clearly, it was not likely cardiac origin, except that she had this immersion pulmonary edema. She didn't have any such symptoms in the past, and he recovered well once she was treated in the hospital. But there are other cases that don't respond that well to treatment. Well, we look a little bit on snorkel as basic equipment and what are the dangers of snorkel, how that can affect the diver. For most trained divers, the snorkel is a good tool that they master and they don't think much about that. But for the beginner diver, water aspiration can be dramatic, can cause choking, laryngospasm, and drowning. And I would remind you to these statistics from Australia that pointed about 10% of fatal cases caused by aspiration. So that may be something that we are overlooking with increasing number of participants in snorkeling. That may become more significant, and we have to pay attention to that. Full face masks have begun another way of snorkeling, and a good full face mask seems to solve some of the issues of mastering snorkel and simple mask. But the concerns with full face masks are, in the first place, carbon dioxide because of increased dead space and because of the flow of the gas through the masks. If it's not perfectly one-way flow with a good oronasal sealing that separates the nose and mouth from the majority, larger space of the mask, then the CO2 can accumulate. Also, because of the narrow spaces and longer path for the gas through the mask, breathing resistance may be significant. If you look at the best mask on the market, you will still find the note of the manufacturer that tells you this is not for swimming. This is just for, this is not for competitive swimming or for fast swimming on at the surface. This is for leisurely floating on the surface. And also this is not for diving under the water. However, when you see the pictures marketing the full face mask, they are mostly pictured divers underwater. That's not recommended use of the mask. So in assessing the full face snorkel mask's safety, we have to pay attention to some issues, and Dan has started a collaborative study with Duke to answer some of these questions. First, physiological problems. How much CO2 builds up? Does it alter the normal breathing pattern? Then what is the design, and does the air flow in one way, and what is the oronasal dead volume? How mechanical failures can affect that, and can a beginner remove mask fast enough to avoid drowning if the mask gets flooded? So this is one of the studies that Dan is doing, planning, trying to answer the questions, because at this point we cannot tell you what mask is safe, what is not safe, and is the full face mask something that a dive operator should be concerned with. Like some of the Hawaiian operators that take divers snorkeling, they refuse to use a full face mask, although some of the mask seems quite fair. In skill diving, the main problem is shallow water blackout. And it has been around for so long, and people have talked about it for so long that now I have nothing new to tell you, although I know many of you are new divers, maybe new divers, but you have to learn and to remember that when you skin dive and you go down to the depth and then come back to the surface, at the bottom, you spend quite a lot of oxygen, and it's coming very low, and then in the stage of ascent, it drops abruptly without any warning. That's enough to lose consciousness before you reach the surface. So please keep in mind, it's most important not to test your limit when you dive alone, because you may lose consciousness and drown. Nobody will be there to pull you that last meter to the surface and save your life. Extreme diving is very interesting, but that is an area for itself. We will never be diving like diving mammals. So humans will never be like diving mammals. You can see here how compression at 50 meters and at 100 meters affects the lung of diving mammals. In the CT skin, you see that its lungs are pushed to up, and then at 100 meters, practically the only air that's remaining in lung is in a bronchi and trachea, where it cannot be exchanged. What reduces amount of nitrogen and diminishes chances of decompression sickness. But on the other hand, we don't have similar adaptations in divers. We know what gives divers advantage, for example, like the volume of the lungs, the larger the total volume of the lung, longer diver can stay underwater, and maybe this difference of 1 liter here can give you advantage of 30 seconds longer apnea. In addition, spleen volume. Spleen is organ that stores a significant amount of blood, like 200 milliliters to 500 milliliters. And during the dive, it contracts and pushes that blood into circulation, increasing carrying capacity of blood for the oxygen, and so provides another 15 seconds longer apnea. Another interesting topic in breath hold diving is deep breath hold diving is risk of decompression sickness. Here is estimated probability that single breath hold dive will develop decompression sickness. You can see this world record passes 200 meters here, but the risk of decompression sickness for that single dive varies from 3% to 6%, which is pretty high, as high as in scuba divers. However, if you do a series of repetitive deep dives, then the risk increases significantly. And this is one of the tables that tells diver how long they have to spend at the surface between the 2 dives to avoid risk of decompression sickness. You can see that times for some of these dives are very significant. What I want to remind us here that why sea mammals do not suffer decompression sickness more often is because they spend very short period at the surface, and practically they are always, when they are on the surface, they still have much higher load of nitrogen in their body than human divers, but because they go soon down again, they avoid bubbles. If they get strangled in the shallow water, they may develop decompression sickness and die of it. So we'll never be as able as sea mammals, but we can do much for our safety. And that is to make sure that we appreciate how stressful diving is. I bring to your attention this study that was looking at the markers of stress hormones, troponin as a marker of cardiac injury, marker of brain injury, ischemia markers, and muscle injury markers. They have found that breath hold diving has most increased all of these factors, while they increase only in some of them increase in static apnea, and they practically do not change much in scuba diving. But breath hold diving is demanding, stressful activity, and we have to change our attitude toward it. We are not going to prescribe and advocate for any restriction and prescriptions, but we can tell you that it's important to maintain healthy lifestyle and to do pre-participation self-screening. We advise breath hold divers and snorkel divers to use diver medical participant questionnaire that's developed for scuba divers, but will very well serve breath hold divers and help you to decide when you have to seek full medical evaluations. We also want you to be aware of your fitness and make appropriate choices. For snorkelers, as we said, be aware of drowning, learn skills, because skills are necessary, use flotation device, and stay in protected area. For breath hold divers, be aware of blackout. Dive with an able body who can help you bring to the surface and limit your hyperventilation. And for free divers, no diving without support and control your nitrogen load. I know that anybody who attempts to provide safety tips on one slide will suffer a load of critiques from beginners and experts, but I'm willing to sacrifice myself for that. I think with this, you will cover most of the safety issues in breath hold in scuba diving. Dan research contributes to that. We are looking into markers of increased risk for cardiac arrest and immersion pulmonary edema. We are doing study of left ventricular hypertrophy. I briefly told you about full face mask safety study that Dan is doing, and we are also looking in the compression risk in free divers in another collaborative study. So with this, I want to thank all our Dan members, pros and businesses for your support, and your support makes medical services and educational programs possible. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Petar, for a great presentation. And thanks to all of you for participating. And as Petar said, thank you for our Dan members, especially for all your support. Let's go to questions. Petar, I've received a few in the chat. This would be a great time if anyone has any more, go ahead and post those below. And I do think you addressed this one already. What are your thoughts on the full face snorkel masks? That was asked early on. You covered it a bit later. Anything to add there?
Well, as I said, full face snorkel mask may be good, but design is crucial. And without looking into that in a serious studies, I couldn't tell much more. The concerns are obvious, and the answers, we want to be very specific once we have the results of our study.
Perfect. Okay, next question. Did they define the term long breath holding in your stats? And does that impact the testing of the 25-yard underwater swim test that some use as part of a swim test or a swim fitness evaluation?
No, that's a good point. Yes, that could be used for in definition of long apnea, long swim, but in the data that we have, that was not used.
Okay, and actually in the question, the person who asked that question got a little more specific and said, regarding the 25-yard swim, is there a concern of blackout during the conducting that particular test?
Well, in some individual, it could be blackouts, of course, but in well prepared people, it couldn't be. I don't suggest doing 25-yard underwater swim as a practice without supervision, because yes, that could cause in some people blackout.
Got it. So it seems like that dedicated one-on-one supervision is probably the key to a practice such as that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. Next question. And this person says, maybe this one's a little off topic, but if you have suffered DCS from Scuba, are you more susceptible to suffering DCS in the future?
It's hard to tell. We have very few cases of DCS among breath hold divers, and mainly they could be explained in a context of the load of inert gas. In scuba divers, with many more cases of DCS at relatively innocuous dives, we know that factors, individual factors such as presence of patent foramen ovale or some others that we are not aware of may play a role and turn an innocuous dive into DCS. However, we have not seen that yet in a deep breath hold diving.
All right. Let's see. Is Dan going to prepare a risk guide or a guide of best practices specifically for snorkeling and or breath hold diving?
I think Dan talked about that in many instances, but that's a good idea, and we will definitely discuss it and try to provide concise guide for snorkeling and breath hold diving.
All right,
that
great.
May be missing in our arsenal.
All right, fantastic. Well, that's our Vice President of Research saying it's a good idea. And so it sounds like that's a job for me and my colleagues in marketing and communications to make that happen. So thank you for that suggestion. Another question for you, Petar. For the onset of pulmonary edema to take place while snorkeling, is there an average time frame or workload for that to take place, or is there data?
Oh, it will be hard to tell. We know, well, I've seen personally onset of immersion pulmonary edema in a middle-aged lady. She was in a cold pool when she's at the beginning of scuba dive. She practically descended 5, 6, 10 feet underwater in the first minute or two, and that was so abrupt immersion pulmonary edema that I didn't see described in the literature. But in general, it takes some time to develop pulmonary edema in snorkeling, and it doesn't have necessarily always be associated with exercise. So various mechanisms are at play, and it's very difficult to provide some calibration in the sense of exercise, water temperature, and other factors.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for that. All right, it looks like we have reached the end of our questions. So once again, thank you to everyone for participating. Thank you, Dr. Denoble, for a great presentation. Please join us tomorrow afternoon. We will have presentations at 2, 3, and 4 o'clock tomorrow. Those will be a repeat of this one at 2 by Petar. We have Disinfection and Infection Control in the Dive Business by Chloe Strauss. That's a repeat of one she did yesterday. So if you missed that, please tune in tomorrow. And then finally, another repeat from yesterday, Lana Sorrell bringing us Stacking the Deck in Your Favor. So if you haven't seen those yet, please join us tomorrow. I'll also say we have some DEMA specials that we're currently offering. If you are in the market for a first aid kit or an oxygen unit, this week is a great time to make that purchase. We're giving away a free black travel backpack with the purchase of any oxygen unit this week, and a free Dan Trucker hat with the purchase of any first aid kit. With that being said, we have reached the end of our day 2 of our Dan at DEMA 2020 seminars. And again, we hope you will join us tomorrow. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your support. Hope you have a good evening.
Four days, 9 safety experts, 13 presentations, one simple mission: to make diving safer. This is Dan at DEMA 2020. Safety seminars from the pros who know.